As many people know, I am very much influenced and oriented by the perspective of the coloniality of power, which was formulated by a Peruvian thinker called Aníbal Quijano. Many people mention many words of that perspective, which the author never called a theory, never referred to it as my theory or the coloniality of power theory. He always referred to it as a perspective, that is, as a way of looking at history, at society, and the world. So, in that perspective, many things, the whole history of colonization is read in another way, in a different way, as the way we usually used to read it. For example, for Quijano, modernity is a consequence of colonization. Why? Because he says, and think this is the colonial shift. Because even if there were in Europe many discoveries and inventions, but all of them needed the authorization from the past. I mean, the sacred past had to authorize everything new. So when the ships of the other side of the sea touched our side of the sea, because those continents didn't have names or they were not conceived as today are conceived. Even Spain, we could say that Spain didn't exist. So we are told in the schools that Spain discovered America, but Spain, I mean Castilla, the kingdom of Castilla reached the south, reached the Califato of Granada only in 1492. So the peninsula wasn't yet conquered. The peninsula is also a result of conquest. And so it started to become a nation only after 1492, which is exactly the same year as those little ships reached the other side of the ocean. So many of the things that in the way we think them today are not really, they were invented around after 100 years of the happenings of the events. And that is one of the important critiques that Quijano made, saying that then when appeared the new world, so the future started to be the source of legitimation and not the past anymore. So you cannot have the modern ideology if you don't consider the future invention and discovery a source of legitimacy, and you only consider the past as that source of legitimacy. So for him, it's only after this discovery of discovering, and this is my own expression, that why we cannot stop speaking about discovery, even if many critics says, there was no discovery because the new world was full of people. So what was discovering? There was not a discovery. But what was really discovered was the legitimacy and the value of the new, the legitimacy and the value of discovering itself. That's why we cannot abandon the world, I believe. That's the reason why we cannot abandon the world. So this importance of the future, this value of the future, this value of the new is a necessity to be able to speak about modernity. On the other side, capitalism needed primitive accumulation. And the primitive accumulation really started to happen after the mines of the New World. I mean, Potosí, Ouro Preto, other many mines of minerals, mostly gold and silver, on the other side of the sea, made the possibility of really the establishment of the history of capitalism. And then the division of the world, of the peoples of the world, into blacks, Indians and white did not exist before. I mean, this categorization of people, this racialization of bodies, continent, and also the knowledges and work of those bodies was racialized. What do I mean? I mean that the people who were conquered, the people who were defeated in the war of conquest, their bodies were attributed a different biology, and that is race. In Quijano's definition, race is the attribution of another organism, of a different organism, of a different biology of the people inhabiting the invaded and conquered continent. So those continents themselves were seen as colored continents. And what I meant immediately after, that the knowledges and products of those bodies who were racialized were also racialized. And that we call it Eurocentrism, we call that the coloniality of knowledge. Everything that came from the white continent, from the continent who was responsible of conquest and colonization, everything that came from that continent was considered of better value. And that is very interesting to analyze, understanding that in class, when you have class, the social mobility is difficult, but in race is much more difficult. So the truth value is extracted from racialized bodies is more stable and more permanent. So what I describe it in a very short and compact manner up to now is the essence of Quijano's contribution, which is now you can find all Quijano's essays about the coloniality, coloniality of power, and coloniality of knowledge too, in a recent book, in a recent reader anthology of Quijano's work published by Duke, and which was organized by Walter Mignolo, Catherine Walsh, and me, and myself. So all the papers are there, and they were not there because after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Quijano practically never wrote in a conventional academic way. Never wrote a book, and never intended to publish in high circulation journals. Just wrote his thinking and put it at disposition of anyone in internet and to his friends. So now we collected all the work in published. And what I did up to this moment was a synthesis, a very compact synthesis of what I consider to be the colonial shift. So at the center of the colonial shift is not class, it's race. Is this what I just explained? The racialization of bodies and the world, and knowledge too. So for him, that was the most important to be considered. And race for him, so at that point, the point of conquest and colonization, race was invented, as I told you, as an attribution of another biology to the bodies of the conquered. So race is an attribution that can be seen by an eye that is informed about that history. So when you see a person, and race changes a lot from one country to the other, and sometimes in the same country, from a region to another region. How do you read a body? How do you read a body? So this reading of the body is done by an eye informed by that history and how that history occurred in a certain phase of the planet. For example, something that people don't know, that Fanon, the greatest of all thinkers about the issue of race and racialization of the world, in his originally homeland, the Martinica, he was not exactly a black man because he was a man of the elite. And that happens in all our countries. He was a man from the elite, from an elite family, a very educated, illustrated person of the society. So he realizes that he is black in this sense of social hierarchy when he arrives in Paris. So that happens for many people that in their own homeland, in their own countries, believe they are white. And when they arrive to the north or to Europe, they are not white anymore. So so that tells you that race is an index of a permanent situation of coloniality, and it's a relationship. It's a colonial relationship. That is what is race in this perspective. Why we speak about coloniality and not about colonialism? Because the colonial laws disappeared from the justice, from law, but they continued to exist in the relationship among people and among nations. So that is why it was necessary to formulate a neologism, which sometimes is not very beautiful, not very nice. But how do you say that we still continue to be in a colonial order without having colonial laws, so colonial right? So that is the reason why we speak about coloniality. So that had an important impact on gender. So which some authors like Maria Lugones and me try to explain in what is classified as the colonial feminism. But Maria Lugones, influenced by some thesis, says that there was not a patriarchy before colonialism. And I cannot believe that because I am an anthropologist. So you can see in many tribal societies the existence of the house of men, which is a house where men contact societies which are have very little contact today with the state front and the white front. You can see that in Brazil, but also in Africa and also in New Guinea, and also in the islands of the Pacific. That in many tribal societies, which very little contact with the white world, with the state, with the national state, the men sort of grow up in they are called the men houses, where they learn how to be men, how to have more callous in relationship with pain. They learn how to face this. I mean, there are many things that are learned that we can sort of synthesize as learning power in tribal societies of the world. So it's very difficult to say that there was not any kind of patriarchal hierarchy before the conquest and the colonization. I believe myself that conquest wouldn't be possible. The victory of the conquerors wouldn't be possible if there were not a patriarchal organization before the conquest arrived, because the men were defeated because they are hierarchical in their institutions. So if you cut the head, if you conquer by weapons, one man appears to be superior in force and power upon the other, and the other undefeated are morally defeated, are ideologically defeated, and masculinity is hierarchical. So I don't have much time now to explain that, but I believe that the previous existence of a patriarchy was really determinant to the defeat of men of the colonized continent. But what was the difference? What is the same as the invention of race is that gender became biologicized, became determined by biology. In race, the bodies of the conquered, the defeated, I'm using very synthetic terms, but I think we can understand what I mean. the bodies of the defeated were biologized through race, and in gender, the bodies of the people in the feminine position and the masculine position were also biologized, which they were not before. And you have very classic anthropology in France and in the British social anthropology. In France, Pierre Clastres, and in British social anthropology of the most classic tradition, like Peter Riviere, who says that in tribal societies, they found you could have a marriage of two bodies of the same kind. So it's not only the colonial feminism that speaks about transitionality in gender. That was there before, even much more than is in modernity. So there are many things that are ignored because for what I believe was a deficit of my own discipline, which is anthropology, because anthropology didn't tell the world and didn't tell the other humanities what it knows about our species. So race and gender, in the way we know them today, are originated from conquest and colonialism. But there is something important that I have seen as an anthropologist, that communal societies of social life in a communal way, in communities, they're dual societies. You have the space of women and the space of men. The roles of men and the roles of women. A very strict division of labor, which is not referred to bodies, but to roles. So what is feminine and masculine are roles, are personalities, are desires, are sexual orientations, but they are not necessarily bodies. And so in pre-colonial societies. So I call them dual societies. For me, there is a hierarchy. There was a hierarchy, a patriarchal hierarchy, mostly of prestige. The prestige of the masculine roles was always greater, the prestige of the feminine roles. But then when you transit to modernity, you don't have any more dual societies, but you have binary societies, which are the societies of the one full political subject and its others, its aliens, which now I call them it defect. Everyone which doesn't obey to the characteristics of the full political subject has to learn how to behave as the full political subject. So this is in many of my papers and talkings and conferences. So let us speak a little bit about feminism and the issue of power in feminism. And I have discussed that I can say it in a very few words. Feminism shouldn't aspire to take the power of patriarchy, because then what do we want? To be in a world that was exactly the same as the world we are leaving behind, with the same characteristics and the same desires, but with other genitalia. This is really very little. It's a very short imagination. We should, and we are trying, some of us, to imagine a world with different characteristics. What do I mean by different characteristics? I mean a world with different targets, different goals, and different desires. So this is very, very, very difficult because it demands imagination. So as Einstein once said, imagination is more important than intelligence. And that imagination is something that artificial intelligence cannot. So I want to speak about that briefly. So until about 30 years ago, knowledge and information, data was absolutely relevant and difficult. Only few people had the information and had the data. In 30 years, information and data are problems, but of a different sign. In the past, by carencia, by lack. In the past, there were a problem from we had lack of information, lack of data. Today, we have an excess of information and data. So, and now you put your finger on the keyboard of your computer, and all the information and data and all their connections among information and data appear. But what is something that artificial intelligence cannot do that is to formulate new questions, the questions that were not formulated yet, and that is the word imagination. So let us continue. So, I mean, I have reached the conclusion lately that the path of feminism is not a path for a minority. I mean, I am emphatically opposed to minoritization. The consequence of multiculturalism was minoritization. There are not minorities. Every difference is universal. So we have to change, have a shift in our minds to understand that, because now we are programmed to believe that there is one universal way of being that starts in the Renaissance, and this is the full human being, the full political human being, with a plain ontology. And then you have the minorities, the people who are partial, the defectives, I call them today. So they have to do something to reach this position, but they will never fully reach that position. So minoritization, formulated by multicultural proposal, which was good because it allowed us to name difference, but without noticing that, for example, in communal societies, difference is only difference. But for us, in modernity and even in multiculturalism, difference is anomaly. Because after modernity, the world invented normality and the normal. And that's a problem we have to solve, because that is no good. I mean, if it leads humankind to invent every day more diagnosis of different psychological problems that are classified and ultra classified, every day more classified, because you have to deal with abnormality. And if you go to a communal society, as an anthropologist does, finds that sometimes difference is an asset. Sometimes difference is something good and not necessarily bad. The different person has some capacities that the completely normal current person hasn't got. Shamans, for example, the sage people in communal societies many times are people who are sort of, for the modern world, are abnormal, but they are only different. In many cases, for example, the old Machis in the Mapuche society were androgynous persons. And in the Candomblé, where I did my fieldwork for many years for my PhD, to have an androgynous personality was an asset. So we have to review. If we want a better word, we cannot imitate the male. And that leads us to the idea of power. Looking for power is looking for substituting the patriarch in his position. I myself, as a feminist, don't want that. For me, it's not an appealing target, and not a form of, and not at all a form of reaching happiness. So I think we have to review some things in feminism. What do we want? And review mostly the fact that we are not a movement for women. We are a movement for the whole of the humankind. is a movement that was never tried as a form to reach a different path of history towards another horizon. And I don't speak of utopia because of things that I don't have time to explain here, because I don't believe in a previously defined future, because many societies who had a previously defined future and described and even painted future as their utopia could not avoid a kind of authoritarianism and cruelty that we must avoid. So I speak about horizons. We have to find a way to trace history, trace the path of history towards a new horizon. And I think the reivindications of the feminists, not all of them, not the ones that are mad for power, can help humankind, the whole of humankind, men and women, to reach a better way of being, a better society. So we were speaking about power, and to speak about power, we can say a few words about the present. And you have the most powerful country in the world, nation, not country, a nation, a sort of a plurality of countries within, but a nation which, for it has to have that power on the world, was all the time supported by 2 feet. One was the foot, one was the foot of power itself, that power, war power, weapons, war intelligence, strategies of spying and getting information, but that was the foot on power itself. But that extraordinarily powerful nation had another foot, that was a foot on hegemony. And then that hegemony, that battle for hegemony, I would say, that the struggle for hegemony started after Second World War in 1948, when that nation realized that presenting to the world an image of the good was a very important dimension of having power too. So you had the war power, I mean the death power, and on the other side, the hegemonic power that was built upon an image of democracy, which was very well worked with great effort by politicians and also by think tanks and assessorships. And that was, for example, from movies, universities, science, in which you could study any position. People from all positions, all ideological positions could work in North American universities. And also a building of an idea of a country that struggles for its internal democratic relationship. So they worked to produce a democratic image to the world that, for example, then from 1948, when they sort of realized that they won a war against authoritarianism, and then Stalin couldn't do the same because democracy was not an important value of the Soviet history and construction, but the US had that value to work upon. So from that on, it started to do that. And then in the 60s, they had 2 important laws with Lyndon Johnson to abolish the apartheid in the South, that they had the same apartheid as in South Africa. So they made rules to integrate the Black people and to punish, inclusive, the amount of crimes and lynching that happened in North American history of Black people. So there was a protection. And then multiculturalism, now very recently, in the 90s, where they just proposed affirmative action, etc. And that was an effort to present to the world the image of a democratic society, though it wasn't so because you had the Vietnam War and you had the invasion of Panama, the accessorship to the wars in Guatemala, and many actions that were not really democratic, but the image was built to get a hegemony in the world. And suddenly, you don't have that anymore. Suddenly, like few years ago, that strategy was abandoned. So that is very, very strange. And a new strategy appeared. I am thinking about that, and we all should be thinking. And the new strategy of how to build an image that could capture the world as a very interesting and alluring image was the image of power, power itself. Mm. And that is what we have today. That nation that sort of works for power all its life since the beginning, first through the hegemonic image of a democratic, happy society, and now through the image of a society who has that power over the world, is the world we are facing now. Power cannot be a good thing because power demonstrates itself through something which is death.